Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next video that was chosen for me to do by one of my patrons. This time, this video was chosen by Jomar, and the video that he chose was for me to give my thoughts on the first couple of episodes of the anime Ajin Demi-Human. Now, the timing on this was actually pretty interesting in that a couple of weeks ago, I had actually just started to watch this series on Netflix, so I have actually watched all of Ajin. So, I'll do my best in this video to obviously focus just on the first 3 episodes, but also to bring in little bits and pieces of what I know and not make it overly spoilery. But anyway, Ajin Demi-Human, what is it? What's it about? I think the first thing that you'll probably notice about this, if you look up any images of it, or even the image that I have here on screen, is that it is sort of CG animation in an anime, which usually is a big turn-off for most anime fans. They very much prefer the 2D sort of traditional animation. And that was initially something that kind of kept me maybe from watching this series earlier. But once I got into it, it's actually really well done 3D animation for what it is, and there's a lot of action in this show, and it never really feels like it's a limitation on the show overall. I still ultimately, I'd like to see what this show could have looked like in traditional animation, but it definitely, I think, fits its style, especially for the IBMs, as I'll talk about in a minute. I think this kind of CG style actually works quite well for them. So what usually is maybe a negative, CG anime, this isn't going to be great, is actually pretty decent here. So I definitely would praise it for that. Second, what is the series actually about? What is the sort of unique thing going on here? It says so in the title, basically. So demi-human, and then the title that they give to a demi-human in the series is an Ajin. So if you are a demi-human, you are an Ajin. And what that means is that basically you are discovered as an Ajin is if you die and then happen to seconds later revive, basically. And the way this looks to people on the outside is that this sort of black kind of mist or kind of dust is probably the best way to describe it, sort of just kind of goes over certain parts of the body, and depending on how the person was killed, it's kind of like it repairs the body, it brings limbs back together and so on, and the person is healed back to normal and are alive again. And they can do this as many times as possible. And that's where the sort of action of the series comes from, in terms of you do have these Ajin at certain points just fighting, getting killed multiple times in the fight, but just being able to just immediately revive and get back up going again. And the core theme that they basically deal with in this series is the idea that they are exceptionally rare. I think within the first 3 episodes we get explained to us that there are 46 Ajin in the world, and then with the discovery that our main character, Kei, is an Ajin, there are only 47 in the entire world. So exceptionally rare. They're not going for just half of the world is this or anything like that. Still super rare. These very unique people. Not a lot is understood about them, and I think that's something that really makes the series work, because you really want to know, wait, how is this the case? You could tell that it's so early on because, anytime an Ajin is discovered, they're immediately attempted to be captured by governments all over the world to do experiments on so they can learn more about them. But none of it takes into account the rights of an Ajin, basically. And that's what a large part of the series sort of revolves around, is that our main character fundamentally just wants to be a normal person. He just wants to go about his sort of boring, normal, everyday life. He just wants to go to school, study, go to medical school, have a successful job, that sort of thing. And then, as we see in the first episode, he's studying really hard, and to the point where it seems like it's all his mother seems to care about. He's studying super hard to do this, walks into the middle of the road while looking at something, and gets hit by a truck. And this is when we see him die, and publicly people see that he died and is resurrected, and so immediately it's the worst possible situation here. He's just outed as an Ajin in front of everyone. There's no taking this back, no making it a secret. But what's very interesting is that they, without saying it, more or less imply that he knew already that he was an Ajin. There's a bunch of scenes within the first couple of episodes that very much get across the idea that he may not have 100% understood, but from what we learn about them, he was an Ajin from a very, very young age. So it kind of suggests the idea that prior to him being hit by the truck here, which is the big event in the first episode, he was killed previously before, and it just begs that question, like, how young was he when he died? And, like, is that kind of why he wasn't properly discovered, because it was sort of kept hidden because it was in some specific way? And that's something the series actually does quite well, is just doing some interesting technical stuff with just the idea of a human who can resurrect if they die. Because, you know, you do get those situations where, like, someone could go their whole life without really knowing, and then all of a sudden, boom, they die, resurrect, their life is over in some way, because that's what happens here. The second he is discovered by other people to be an Ajin, he is on the run, because what they do really well within the first episode is getting across the idea that kind of word is spreading, like, across the internet. Like, this video starts to spread about the US government performing these brutal experiments on an Ajin that they captured. And so Kay sees this, and immediately when he's being chased, he doesn't want that to happen. He doesn't want to get captured and be tortured like that just for being something he never chose to be. And that's a huge kind of part of the series, is just like, of course, the Ajin don't choose to be that way, it's just the way it is. But now you're going to see them be kind of used, exploited, not really treated as being a living being effectively, not being treated as being a human, which is there's a few interesting things within the opening few episodes with regards to just, you know, the idea of, like, the detective guy asks Kay's mother, you know, what are your thoughts on your son recently being found out to be an Ajin? And her answer is pretty brutal in terms of, like, what they're going for here. It's like, I had no idea that, like, my son wasn't human. Like, that's her reaction to it. That, like, she gave birth to him. You know, I can't really remember if we're told anything about his father over the course of the series. But either way, you know, the idea is that, you know, two humans gave birth to him, and just because this thing happened to him, suddenly his mother isn't thinking of him as a human anymore. And that's the way everyone views it. The second this happened, he goes from being just normal person, doesn't really stand out at all, to suddenly he stands out because he has these, like, abilities. Even if he doesn't know how to use them initially, he stands out just because of that. And it makes you feel a lot of sympathy for, you know, the main character, because you don't want him to get tortured. You wonder why this is the way it has to be. But then you also think, realistically, if something like this was ever discovered in real life, like, if things probably would be like that to a certain degree. The idea of someone who is effectively immortal, you can't kill them. If they die, they just get back up. And the applications of that, which they show in the opening of the first episode with a shot to basically the first Ajin on record of the soldier of God who was involved in this battle in Africa, and it was just this one guy, you know, one-man army effectively, just getting killed constantly, getting back up, taking lots of people out, and eventually he is subdued by the US Army. So that's a very, you know, interesting thing of, like, yeah, like, if you really took these Ajin on and did something with them, they become this tool more so than, like, being actually living beings. And that's where the villain of the series, Sato, comes in, who is an Ajin. You don't get too much on him in the first 3 episodes, but he's such an interesting character. I think it's worth at least talking about him to a certain degree here, with the idea that he ends up sort of being this very mixed character with regards to you can sort of see, you can get behind some of what he's saying, but also you question if he actually believes in it. So he's all about, initially, it seems like, Ajin rights. He wants to save any Ajin who is captured and kind of recruit them to his side, all to build up a group that can change things for the better for Ajin. That seems to be his motto. He wants actual rights written into law for Ajin, a place for them to sort of live like just on their own, basically respect them in like, yeah, we are a different species, but allow us to exist without being kind of hunted effectively. But the way he goes about it is like pure chaos effectively. He seems to want battle and conflict at every single opportunity, and you kind of wonder, he could change things if he just went about this the right way, and he gets people behind him because he is so strong and powerful. But it's very clear, it's just like, does he care about this as much as other people do, or does he just want to cause more chaos to have more battles and have more fun from his point of view? And that's what makes him such an interesting character, and that ultimately that's what we're looking for out of the series, is for there to be a sort of peace between humans and Ajin, allow Ajin to just exist in the world without being persecuted against. And what he's doing, does it help or not help? And similarly, that's where you have Tosaki, who's like the main Ajin investigator that we meet here in this episode. He's sort of an interesting kind of perspective in all of this, in that like he obviously has investigated them enough to know the best way to take them down and hunt them, and he wants to get them on his side. But he's more willing to actually, I suppose, use Ajin and give them a certain level of respect, because I think from his perspective he wants Ajin to just be sort of useful and not be like Sato and be like just these chaotic sort of menaces in the world. So in that sense, like I think there's some really interesting topics, thought-provoking topics kind of being brought up here, not just because it's an interesting series, but just like always thinking about like, oh, imagine that happened in real life. It's kind of that sort of Death Note kind of style thing of like, it asks you some questions as the viewer, and I think it's a similar one here. And yeah, there is action, like it's pretty brutal. It because it's 3D animated, it's this weird one where like it's 15s, but it feels like some of the action is like kind of 18s, but the way they animate it, it's never like overly just like gratuitous. So it's just getting across the idea of like, yeah, like the Ajin are dying, they're actually getting killed in pretty brutal ways, but they come back from it, but it still leaves blood, they still get hurt. And that's, it leads into some of these kind of interesting things as the series kind of progresses about what other abilities do Ajin actually have, because we learn some of them in the first few episodes. The first one is that, like, obviously, yes, if they're killed, they can be revived. The second one is that if they do a very kind of powerful, like, emotionally charged scream, they can sort of stop humans in their tracks. It just temporarily paralyzes them. It's this kind of ability for Ajin to get away, but it seems to be, for the most part, like, easily countered by just, blocking your hearing sort of temporarily. The other thing that they don't get into a lot of depth on here, but just from what's happening, it seems fairly clear, and that is the IBM, the invisible black men, or ghosts as other characters call them. And effectively the idea is that in certain scenarios, an Ajin can basically learn to one, call out, and then secondly control this kind of this invisible black ghost-like being that is kind of humanoid in form and is just exceptionally powerful. It's invisible to most people, with the idea that depending on the circumstance, the controller can make the IBM visible or not to certain people, and then I think most Ajin can actually see them, and that's a way that they sort of recognize each other. And so we get to see that through Tanaka, who's basically ends up being like the second in command to Sato on the sort of villain side of things. He uses at the end of the episode, and then they tease throughout most of the episode the idea that Kei has his own one and has had his own one since he was very, very young, but doesn't know the details about it. And it creates these very interesting situations. His IBM is very unique. It sort of has a personality of its own. It is unique compared to all of the other ones that we do get to see. and it becomes a bit of a plot point, of course, as the series progresses. But yeah, they're the abilities that we get up to now. And then as the series progresses, of course, they explain more and more about like specific ways in which they, the enemies, I suppose, of Ajin have learned to sort of take them down. One of which we do learn about here, which is that they primarily realize that, tranquilizers, that's the best way to do it. Because if you kill them, they just get back up. And you either have to do this thing where you just kill them over and over again, just keep shooting them, so that even if they revive, they just are immediately killed. But that's like a waste of resources almost. Why not just tranquilize them? Whereas, like, you haven't killed them, you've just put them to sleep, and that resurrection doesn't mean anything if they're just asleep. So that's the obvious way to sort of subdue a Ajin. So some very clever stuff going on here. But most of the first 3 episodes, the plot is about Kei trying to escape from being captured, and they do a very interesting sort of character thing here of the idea that he basically sort of gets betrayed by his new friend group of like him trying to be a doctor, be the kind of perfect student, but those friends never really cared that much, and so when he's an Ajin, they're like, oh, there's a bounty for anyone who brings in an Ajin. And then they set up the idea that he had this friend from the past, Kaito, who Kei has tended to ignore the last while. They implied through flashback it's primarily because his mother told him to like break off contact, and he'd sort of just gone along with that. But they bring them back together here because when Kei is found out to be an Ajin, the two come back together. When he has to call someone for help, he calls Kaito, and it's a really nice kind of renewing of this friendship as they kind of go on the run, and you just initially see these 2 thugs go after them because at this point Kei is broadcast all over the news because of course it's worldwide news. The 47th ever, immortal person effectively in the world. That's a huge thing. Of course that would be all over the news. So people know about him, and there's this sense of Kei is sort of putting Kaito in danger by getting help from him. That Kei can die and just revive. But if in the middle of these pursuits, Kaito goes down, he's not coming back. And there's this kind of sense of, guilt with, just personally, Kei having just kind of forgotten about him, broken contact with him. And then there's also the guilt of like, and now I've called you to help me and I'm putting you back in danger again. And ultimately Kaito is just perfectly willing to do it. He's always considered Kei a friend, and it becomes the setup. And interestingly with the main character as well, they do this sort of surprising thing where he seems so normal in that, like, okay, there's a little bit of like, ooh, it's not the best thing that he has this kind of, he sided with these people over his actual, best friend, and he seems a little bit too focused on school and stuff like that, but otherwise normal, and you do feel for him given what's going on. But then they start to set up the idea that he is a bit of a weird character in terms of his sister doesn't particularly seem to like him and kind of thinks he's like selfish, that like he only cares about himself and anything he does is only something that will benefit him. And they're borderline like setting up the idea of like he's going to like abandon Kaito here. They're on the run kind of in the forest. They've temporarily found a place to hide out. That Kei is going to leave Kaito, not just because he wants to help him not get injured or anything like that, but just because this is sort of who Kei is at this point, and you sort of want to like, you sort of have to get your to try and understand the character here. It's interesting where they go with him and the back and forth. They definitely, I think, do a good job at just making him interesting. He's clever, he's thought-provoking, and ultimately has that simple idea of he does just want to live a normal life. So he wants Ajins to be respected, to be given rights so he can get back to a normal life. But how does he make that happen when all of these other Ajin are causing trouble out there and he's just being lumped in with them because no one has any nuance on the topic of Ajin in the world? So some very, very, very interesting stuff going on here. and there's all these different factions that come together and so on. And like I said, we have our main villains in Sato, but also Tanaka now. We have these sort of police officers who are kind of investigating Ajin in Tosaki and so on. You have Kei himself. Over the course of the series, we do get introduced to a bunch of other Ajin, and you know, I think the series goes places. Like, I think there's 2 seasons up on Netflix. A 3rd season hasn't been confirmed, even though there is, I think, manga content to make a 3rd season. I don't know how much more manga content there is, but the series isn't over with just what is on Netflix. But I definitely liked it. I think the season 2 kind of ended on a cliffhanger, and I want to know more. And that's definitely a positive for the series, about just that it got to a point where I still want to see more. So I suppose bringing the video to a close in or around here. It's a series I really liked. I kind of just went into randomly because, I'll just find something new on Netflix to watch. This is what I went for, and came out of it really, really liking it, like a lot, as like a unique idea, but also a very simple idea. Just something that at times can be like, oh yeah, of course, an immortal character, but such a good take on it, of just sticking to this as the main and like only focus of the series, and you know, giving depth to it. I think it was really, really well done. So I'll just end with some explanation of Patreon stuff. So obviously this video was a request from Jamar, and you can also request videos too if you come in on the Patreon. So the best way to do this is just to say that if you come in at the $5 tier, you get to request a video. Now, that is either you can choose a topic for me to do an Avatar discussion topic video on, because of course Avatar is the main focus of my channel, Avatar: The Last Airbender, Legend of Korra. So you can choose one of my longer running series, a video in that series, the discussion topic series. So if there's a topic you don't think I'll get to, I may not just randomly cover it, that's your way to make it happen, by coming in at the $5 tier and requesting a specific topic. Or, like this video, if there's a specific series you'd like me to talk about, you can request me to watch the first few episodes of it, or if I'm familiar with it, just talk about it. Usually it's an anime series. I tend to specify that just because it fits in with more of what I'm doing on my channel. But series just in general if you want. And I will review, like in this video, discuss my thoughts on the series. Do I recommend it or not? That sort of a thing. And yeah, that's how you do it. I do have a tier above that, which is the $10 tier, which is a tier where you get to choose a video for me to do, but then also you get a second choice of a topic, whether it be the Avatar or a discussion topic series, or a TV series to review. But you can be on that video, which is basically like we recorded over Skype. It'd be like a podcast style thing if you've seen the podcast content that I've done previously, and it would just be a discussion back and forth. That's why it's the highest tier, because it's more sort of interactive. And then the only final thing I'll say about the Patreon is just that the other tiers are, of course, the $1 tier, which is more of the just supporting the channel tier. It's just the sort of donation tier. And then the $3 tier is the tier where you basically get access to the exclusive Patreon videos that I've put up before. So a lot of that is stuff like my top 10 anime series. I have a series of like anime movie reviews that I'm doing right now, plus a few other sort of scattered videos where I think there's an anime here or there I've talked about, and some other stuff like that. And there, of course, will be more coming as the weeks go on. So, you know, once you come in at least the $3 tier, you get access to all of those videos. $5 tier is where you can choose a topic. $10 tier, you can choose a topic, plus you can also be on the discussion. But yeah, link to my Patreon in the description below if you want to support the channel. But other than that, that's been my discussion here on Ajin Demi-Human. Thanks for watching this video, and bye.